All right, welcome to the September 2nd deep dive into CSS and templates. I am Skip Mussett, and I will be your host today. I am joined by Coy, who will moderate and try to answer some of your questions in chat. All right, as we wait, just going to go over some I guess objectives today as far as some of the things that I want to cover and what today is about and maybe today what today isn't about. Um, we're going to learn some structure of a CSS and how to put that. I'm going to call it a template. I'm going to put it in a form that can make it repeatable and usable from project to project. Understanding how to I think lay out a UCI that lends itself to that template process. And then the principles of CSS and then how to make them work for you. What today, I guess, will not be is kind of the basics of CSS. We won't talk about like colors and backgrounds and borders and things like that. We will get into some CSS and talking about a file and things like that, but it'll be more about how the structure works rather than how to write a particular CSS. We have plenty of deep dives and other materials that you can dig into that can help you on that road as far as growing your CSS knowledge. This today, as Coy affectionately and I call it, I went down a rabbit hole about a year ago, something like that now. And I was determined I'm going to learn CSS. And then there's CSS as it relates to Q-SYS. Those are not necessarily the same answer all the time. And what I came out with was a tool, what I consider a tool, this template tool. And today is really helping you understand this tool, how it lays out, ultimately so that you can use it, edit it, create your own, understand what's going on. And, again, why you would do it. I built this tool after going through this process. I built it more for a speed. You can do some really cool things in CSS and you can make some really awesome looking panels. I think that I make good looking panels. They're not necessarily the be all and end all panel, but they work, they're repeatable. And hopefully I think that profitability, as far as timing is really what it was about for me. As far as the ease from project to project is more about what my objective was for this. But first, I think everybody, Boy, I'm still sharing, right? You can see my screen. Right. Let me turn something off here.
Seems like the people joining has kind of leveled out here, so we should be good to go.
All right. First thing that I want to talk about is, before we get to the CSS part, now I'll do some things in reference. I just want to show you this full screen real quick. Is I tend to, and this potentially this layout could change. I tend to regionalize, what I call regionalize a panel. I, as a habit, put what I call navigation buttons or primary buttons to navigate between different parts of your UCI at the bottom. And I think part of that is that I think that most of the users have been conditioned to look at the bottom when you're doing major navigation, right? If you look at the bottom of this screen here, that all of my applications that I might want to switch to are at the bottom of the UCI or the bottom of the software window, right? I do get, however, some information at the top. So I leave this top bar as a link to navigation. But this would be my navigation header is what I call this. And then the middle portion of this screen of the UCI would be what I call source, where you would select the next level of navigation, or you would be selecting a source you would be selecting some level of sub navigation at this point, and then what I call transport, and I'll show you examples of all these as we go through the CSS and we go through this file, would be my accents, right? So here is my navigation, right? Here is, well, let me show you this one. Say a sub navigation or a source, right? These are all coordinated, right? And I have subtle differences. They go together, but they're subtle differences, right? Between a navigation button and a source button. And then there might be things like where I'd want to accent different colors inside here, which I would call transport. I'm going to bring up my CSS, which is here. That's not what I wanted. There we go. That's what I wanted. Was that good on this from a sizing standpoint? Okay.
You might zoom in your CSS just a touch, if possible.
So wrong button. And I can move this over a little bit. All right, good. All right. So this is the CSS file. Now, for right now, I'm going to hide the root folder. We're going to come back to that at the end, and I'm just going to talk about how this file works. The first thing that I do is if there is any custom fonts that in your project, if your customers or anything has a custom font, you can import. I always usually start my CSS file by importing anything there. I also, that you'll get as a part of these assets, you'll get some custom icons that I made, the Oscar Origins and the Oscar Extras. Below that is, and we'll start the structure, right? There is a root folder, and I'll come back to that. These next pieces here are global attributes, right? They get applied at startup. As soon as the file is loaded, it automatically applies what you have and when there's no dot, right? It is also the lowest priority, right? It can get overwritten with anything below it, anything in the file. So my objective here was really that somebody challenged me in a class one time that there wasn't a way to default a text size. So everywhere there is a possible text, I put it at a 24. This is also where I'm calling a font family. So I'm calling those imported fonts so that all of my fonts are already set to at least one of my imported fonts. But if I want to make them bold or thin, I can do that at another point. But I come in as a regular font right here. And that's really all I'm doing in these global properties. Next, you see here the button nav, right? Referring to the bottom buttons here. Now, I can name these anything I wanted. You can name them anything you want. There is an off state. I have a pressed state and a value one or my on state. Now, there are more options in there. There's a value one press state. There's other things in there as well. I have found that in controlling these, this controls visually anything that I really want to do. But again, there's my button navigation. And if you look, I'm referring to anything that starts where they're all referring to variables, right? This is that first hint to understanding a template, right? I'm not recreating these. I'm calling these above it. Right, so I have my button nav, I have my button source, again, anything in the middle of the screen right here. And then I have my transport, which would be those accented, right? Could be this, oops, yeah, like a row code. Click on, right, where I want an accented, right? These would be transport controls. Right, I want to make an extra accent to something from a visual standpoint. So that's why I have 3 different types of buttons. Now, all I'm calling here is mostly colors, right? I do call a radius and a border width, but I'm not putting any text sizes. I found that layering those on later because I don't always know exactly what size buttons are. That just works best for me. All right, as we go down, I have this nav icon font only. And you're like, what is that? Right? This is my navigation buttons. This I'm tracking along with it so that the colors track together, right? Now, what happens? Does everybody understand the C and CSS is cascading? A CSS is a giant argument table, right? That it is defining as it goes down who wins over who, whatever that is, whatever that right English word is at that point.
Grammar Nazis in the house.
I am going to show you something, right? If you look at under the CSS class name, right, there's that first one. That's my button navigation. Right, my font only. I'm going to check that. And in theory, this one should win, right? Because they would be the same priority and this would be later on the list. And you're like, well, nothing changed. Or did it? Did it change? What if I apply it to this one next to it? You're like, where did the background go? I'm going to show you something that's subtle, right? When you look at, and this is something that tripped me up. We're calling a background on the off state, the press state, and the on state, right? In this navigation button, right? So I'm defining what that background is, this color, both on the off state and the on state. In this class, the font only, I am telling it on the off state to go transparent, right? But on the press state and the on state, I am not defining what the background does. So yes, that class does override and would override anything that would be a part of that button nav, except for I'm not redefining it in every single location. So it will keep what doesn't get redefined. All right, that's a big key feature is that if I don't redefine it in the class that I'm calling that would have priority over it, it's going to carry on what it had previous, right? Because you didn't rewrite it. If there are any questions, I'm not going to open it up till the end. We will have questions at the end, but that is one of those that I want everybody to understand that part is that it is a cascade, right? If they are the same priority, the last one checked wins, right? In this argument, this is the argument table. The last one checked wins, right? But if you don't redefine every single thing in the what got overridden, it will carry through what it originally had. So if there is anything that's called in this button navigation that doesn't get overridden in the button font class only, it will carry forward from this navigation. Right? All right, as we go down, that takes care of that. I go into colors. Coy likes the bold. We're going to go bold. I left it bold for you, Coy.
Gee, thanks.
So we're going to take a look at this mute button. Let me go ahead and emulate here real quick. All right, so you see how this works, right? Off state, on state, pretty straightforward. Two different icons. And we have the color background mute, which is what we're referring to here. All right, if I apply that, I then have overwritten, I'm not doing anything with the icons, but I have overwritten the backgrounds. Right? Right. So now when it's on, green, muted, red. Now let's say that I want to make that subtler. Subtler.
Is that a word?
Not as bold. Right. If I comment that out, maybe if I comment and I save, which I will get an indication over here. Now let's mute. Now I am not telling it what to do, or I'm not overriding the off state, right? I am only overriding the pressed and the on state right here, right? These are the value 1, which is my on, and this is my pressed value. Pressed value, so you know, is a way that you can get some indication, and I'll show it to you on a trigger, right? These are all trigger buttons. I can at least get some kind of feedback that I've pressed a button. Obviously, I'm not getting a Boolean state, but I'm getting some indication, and that comes through the pressed value from a trigger standpoint. Hopefully, everybody understands the cascading part. All right, as we go through here, and again, these are only named the way they're named. There's 2 reasons. Partly, I wanted to group them together because they're the same priority, the same class grouping, right? So I'm grouping my classes together, right? And these would all, anything with color that has to do with the background, right? Has to do with, this is, oh, my power button. Power buttons being the exact opposite of a mute button when you talk about on and on. Anything, if I want to actually specially change an icon, right? These are the icon mutes. Let's try this one. Stop emulating. And I want to the icon mute. All right, so that all I did on this one was change the icon color. I didn't mess with the backgrounds on or off. I just changed the icon color. So I want to do a subtler accent to it. Then anything with font. I find that font, again, you're not always knowing what size things are. And here's something that visually you can kind of see how this cascade works, right? I have things on this button down here set as a 36. If I do anything below it, nothing changes. But if I do it above, right? Last one checked wins, right? All fonts have the same priority in class, so the last one wins. Padding and margin. From a CSS standpoint, from the way that HTML works, but there is a container, right? There's a container outside this button that holds the image inside it, right? The margin, I can increase my margin, which increases the gap between right? I get my padding, my margin. I increase the gap around the container. That's your margin. Your padding is what's inside the container, and I change that. All right, that's what happens inside here, just so you understand the difference between margin and padding. And this is the other 2 classes from a font size if I wanted to bold them or make them thin. All right, that I did at import. When you're writing classes, I know this might be hard to see. Coy, can you see that?
Yeah. Mhm.
So you cannot start a class name with a number. You can do an underscore, which will put it at the top. So if I was literally to start it with underscore, it would be the first thing on the list. So I want everybody to understand this. When you're using an icon font, as frustrating it is to me, and that's one of the reasons why I started down this path, was to be able to put an icon at the top and put text at the bottom. And you can do that. And you can do that with an image. You can't do that with an icon font because it is a font and they get attached to each other. What you can do, and the only thing that you can do is I can take this icon and I can put it at the front of the text or at the back of the text, right? Just so you see that here. That's all that you can do is those two things. Q-SYS does not support multi-line or multi-text with different fonts associated to them. So they get attached. They are one line, even though there is two different fonts, it is one line of text. All right. Oh, here's something else that I want to, there's this font list combo box. Now, a font list combo box, you're like, well, that has something to do with some fonts. There's some fonts inside it. And my fonts have nothing to do necessarily with padding and with margin. My font sizes are obviously what those are, my font alignments. Part of this is I just use my naming to group them together. This is my own personal preference. You can do whatever you want to do with that. I will tell you that on specifically around a combo box, I do it all with that, is that when you do a combo box and you have a drop down, you can put a semi-transparent wind color on that. But you will see everything below it. So I usually suggest to you that you have a background of a solid color in all of your combo boxes. I did write some classes in here for our new Flexbox in 10, although I'm not going to show you anything with a Flexbox today. There's a lot of moving parts on a Flexbox, and so you need to start to understand what those are and how you can work those. I'll come back to that when we do the root. The next I do is just anything with an icon.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Sure.
While you're talking about icons. We had a question about the icon font only, if you'd re-explain that and what you're using that for.
So I use it for, as a matter of fact, it's partly right here. I use it to track so that my buttons and the colors inside my buttons track with the icon color, although I don't want any backgrounds or any borders. In essence, it takes and makes the borders 0 and it takes all of the backgrounds and makes them transparent, but it does track the colors to get together. So you can see that these are the same two grays, right? It's a dark gray. And I use it to track. So this title text will track along with my navigation, right? This is the nav font only. This is the navigation, right? I take the background colors and the borders off of it, but the colors as far as the text are the same. And it's just a tool that I use to coordinate, right? Coordinate my colors with a particular section of my UCI. Like these two, this is a source font, icon font only. This is the same thing, right? I don't have any borders around this, but they're tracking along with my source buttons, right? So if I look at this, let me disconnect. All right, this is my source button. This is my source icon font only, all right, when you look at that, so that the colors match. And I'm just using it as a coordination tool. Does that answer hopefully that answers everybody's question. All right, where was I? Icons. These are the list. Now I've given you some of the syntax. I'm not using a lot of them in this file, but we have, and I would tell you to go. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make this statement before anybody gets started too far down the rabbit hole of CSS, is that you go to the help file. And what I did one weekend was bring out a blank UCI and drag a bunch of all the different controls that you could do and copy things out of the help file. Or use this file or use whatever file you want and just change things and watch what happens to the buttons and watch what happens to the things. The help file is going to keep you inside the bumpers. There are things that you can stretch. There are things that will work that aren't in the help file. But if you don't understand how it works from inside the help file, you're going to be frustrated a lot longer than you would need to be. And that's just my recommendation after going all the way down the rabbit hole. But I built a structure for, and this is, you can get these libraries and the links to them in the ZERB. As a matter of fact, Dan actually told me to have this up. Let me see if I can do that. 1 second, you see. No, I'll come back to that. There's a library, but this is the ZERB font, and you would use foundation, and then there's the Google material font, and then you use material. And so this is the syntax. And then through that font on those links, you can actually look up what icon you want, and then you type the name. These are the custom fonts down below for the Oscar that are all built in, right? And then you can see them as you go, right? All of the different icon fonts. Right, and I can apply those. And again, all of these icons, as you go down this list, are the same priority as far as who wins over who. So who would the last one checked wins, in essence, right? So if this one is direction down, right? Just like the text, if I put something above it, nothing happens. If I put something below it, it changes, right? Last one wins. So there's a few icons in here. Meters, and if you notice, there's no, this is a global meter, meaning that it is as soon as the file starts, everywhere you have a meter, it automatically applies. The same thing to a fader, right? There's a fader here, right? Same thing. Now, for this, and if you notice, there's no class name. I don't need a class name in order for a meter that's a global. It just automatically happens. But I want to make this a fader what? Do I want to make it a dimmer or color temperature?
Color for sure.
Color temperature, look at that. For Koi's sake, I actually built that for him. For a lighting system, right, I can now adjust my color temperature. I can also do a dimmer, right? There are some subtle nuances to understanding how those work in linear gradients, particularly on the dimmer. And these are those different states. Coy and I went down the rabbit hole of radius and the corner radius, so I have a lot of that in here, which I do utilize in different parts. I'll emulate real quick. Right, so this is my corner radius, right? You notice it's more than what's up here. I only have stroke on the outside of all these buttons. right? So it kind of makes this holistic as a little tool that you can use. So that as a way that you can draw attention and keep focus in a particular area. So you can explore that. And then, oh, that was weird. And then anything I'm doing to the UCI, I do at the bottom, right? If I want to, like these general border colors, anything accent, logos, overlay colors, things like that, I just put those at the bottom because they're just general things that I do to the UCI. They're not necessarily button specific. So that is the general structure of the CSS. But I told you that we were going to come back to the root folder, which I would tell you is the most important section of the UCI. This is where you house variables, right? Variables are just things that you're going to refer to later. And if you saw, like, as you saw in the style sheet itself, I'm going to make this big. Maybe not that big, right? We can all see it. We're good. Right. I'm a huge proponent of using somebody's branding information in order to style your web page. It is something in part 2 of this series that I will talk a lot more in depth about branding at UCI. As a matter of fact, I will actually style a UCI based on branding in front of you as the last exercise. So you can see what that process looks like. But this one has actually been styled based on Q-SYS and its branding guidelines, which are fairly extensive. But as you go through this root file, these are, I'm just referring, when I say size, I'm just referring to some pixel sizes, right? And they could be applied to a radius, they could be applied to a border width, they could be applied anywhere I want, right? It's just whatever I want to use these for. I usually keep a set of standard colors in there, the red, green, white, black, light gray, dark gray. They kind of come up in a lot of different UCIs. And then believe it or not, these Q-SYS has like 25 colors in their branding guidelines. We are very specific about that. I do all of the colors that are in there. I also have what I call semi-transparent or opaque versions of all of those. I have anywhere that I want to refer to any images, as in a logo, a background. There's a couple images in the folder that refer to an LED. And I am particularly partial to linear gradients, as you might see in this. I use linear gradients a lot. Just for me, it just shows something, some differences. Although I just did a project where that didn't translate as well, and that their solid colors actually worked better. But there's times where it will tell you. And again, the part 2 of this will go a lot deeper into branding and those guidelines. And I'm referring to, again, I've just built gradients based on the colors that you saw up there, right? Now, this is a key point. This is a variable inside of a variable. Let me repeat that again for you. This is a variable getting called inside of a variable. What happens if I haven't created this variable that I call inside a variable? Very bad things. As in, the script will stop because it can't figure out what to do. And so it will break. So be very mindful when it says cascade. You cannot drive the car if you haven't built the car. So don't call a variable until you've built it. And that being said, as we go down, if you're looking at the file down below, right? And I'm referring to, in this nav button, I'm referring to nav color off, right? As a variable. So when I get to the navigation section, this is inside my root folder. I'm defining that as nav color off as color dark gray. That means Up here, I'm referring to, these are some global colors, right? What I might use for the borders or overlays for backgrounds inside of a border or something like that. I also have this set up to where all of my styles will change. Oops, wrong side. All right, Koi, here's another chance. All right, we take a poll. Is it red or green? Let's poll the class. we got a minute. The red. All right, let's do it. Let's go red, red. All right, and for my overlay opaque color, I'm going to go what? Red.
Eredo.
Red.
Those of y'all asking for the file, I'm doing my best to send this to you guys.
Send it in.
It seems like some people didn't get it. I'm working to send it to everybody right now. So I appreciate your patience there. I'm working through a very long list of emails to get everybody's email, but you will get it. I'm working on it now.
I apologize. That didn't happen up front. So now I've changed my global gradient and my global gradient O. And if you look down below, I'm calling on that global gradient and I'm calling on that global gradient O right here. So if I go to File and then Save, oh, you got to stop emulating, skip, disconnect. All right, I save it. And then everything has changed. Right now, again, that's just how I wrote it here. Now I could override it in a couple of places. I could override it and just put a very specific color that I don't want it to follow along because I want it to be something else. And this is where you can have fun with it, because you could write this where I just change a few things up at the top and everything else changes below. And that's what the idea is that you really should only change your root folder right in here. Once you get your template set up below, that you should only write what's here. You know, obviously you're putting whatever the project is. You're going to insert your colors and those names. You're going to insert whatever logo images or background images that you want to put in or what have you. Build some of your gradients if you're using those. And then define these sheet. Define this part of your root folder. Once you define all the parts that are in here, you really shouldn't need to touch anything the rest of the file. Everything else below is calling on what's happening inside this root folder. And that to me is what that, if I come out with anything out of this rabbit hole, again, this is not about making the best looking UCI that you've ever seen. It's about the ability to make a consistent, duplicatable UCI that, if you're mindful, like I said, from a branding standpoint, as far as their colors and what you're using, that will turn out good looking UCIs and consistent UCIs, time and time again. That's what this whole objective was. And we will make sure, I'm going to reiterate what Coy just said. We will make sure that everybody gets the content from this. It's just one designer file, just so that you know when you get a designer file. I probably should have covered this at the beginning, but I didn't. That if you go to Tools, Design Resources, this is going to show you a lot more. It'll show you what's installed.
Screen doing there? I don't. It's on our side. Never mind.
It's weird.
It didn't look that way on the webinar.
All right. So just so that you know that the style sheet comes along with the designer file. So when you're only going to get one file, which is the designer file. In here, you can download this UCI or this style to your PC that way. And then once you do that, you can edit. This just shows you what it is. You can't edit from here. I would tell you to edit in VS Code. You can edit in Notepad, but you don't get the nice nifty colors and the hints that you get in VS Code. I think that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, let's hit a few here. So this one's actually kind of piggybacks on another one that I've already answered, but we had a question that says, using PNGs over SVGs, do you recommend using PNGs? We've noticed SVGs files pixelating. And I kind of answered this to another question about using a font versus using images and importing those images, but I'll let you kind of explain the difference there of those two.
So I'm gonna answer that in a two-part answer. If you are talking about using an SVG inside of for like a button for like an icon, and the button is not going to be giant on the page, probably not going to see too much of a difference. But the difference will come. I use for like a customer logo, where that could get big in a splash screen or a welcome screen. I pretty much use PNGs because I agree with you that I have noticed that depending on the rendering engine, they don't always render out right and they don't always scale right. And part of that is that in an SVG you lose some color depth, and that's part of what can happen in the pixelization part. So definitely customer logos. I do all PNGs for those. But other than that, I might use some images in background. I try to use as few images as possible, actually. These icons are technically SVGs, but they're built into an icon font. And just as a resource, and maybe Koi can put it in the chat if they want it. I use ICOMoon, ICOMOON.com, that builds an icon font. So if you have SVGs and you care to go down the rabbit hole of building your own icon font, God bless you, because it'll be an adventure. There's plenty of icons. Like I said, you have plenty of icons in this style sheet. Plus with the Zerb and the Google library, that those will be, there's plenty of icons that keep you busy before you have to go there.
He followed up, and I'll put the link in there. He followed up, said we've defaulted to using PNGs for that issue. Happens on team panels, Zoom icons that are shipped with a template. I think you get a lot more flexibility in using icons versus importing images. One of the things that's really much easier if it's a font is changing those colors, because if you're importing an image for your icons, not that that doesn't work, but every time you do a new project for a new customer, you've got to recreate those icons in a new color. Whereas if you can build your icons into a font using something like ICOMoon, you can adapt on the fly.
Yeah, like anything, even using, like I said, like we talked about the Zerb or the material font, the Google material font, those, it sees those as a font, just like you can color the font, right? I can change the color of text. I can change the color of an icon like I can a font. And that's the part where, again, the reason I built this template the way that the outcome was for speed. Again, you can go a lot of different ways and manage a lot of different things, but it's like Coy said, it gets harder to repeat when you're managing a bunch of images. And at some point, it doesn't matter. You will slow things down as well. Just managing that many images from there.
Another question that came up, and I'll let you dive into this because I'm trying to still send the file to people, but it says, what about this process of creating a style sheet lends itself to repeatability? Is it the use of root and defining those variables all in one place? Is the alternative to be defining variables from scratch in each style sheet?
So repeatability. Well, I mean, if you repeated it with the same set of colors, it's just repeatable. But my point to repeatability is to make as few changes. So yes, it's all built into the root folder. It's all managing the root folder, meaning I should only have to make it's not 100%. Meaning there are special occasions or special situations where I might have to write some classes below this for a particular situation. But the idea is once I define my set of colors based on the branding guidelines. I'm just going to use it that way. The branding guidelines, and I change and I build my root folder out, I'm done. And I just apply it to the UCI, right? That if I change, and that's what makes it that they are consistent, right? Now, that doesn't mean they look exactly the same every time, that I can change, right? In my global, this is my global border width. If I change my global border width, right? It's not going to look exactly the same, but I can repeat that I'm managing border width, and I'm managing border width everywhere I want to manage border width, right? I can make it thinner, right? I have access into, and part of that is understanding the style sheet itself. So this is, you're not going to necessarily understand every single thing right out of the gate as far as what I'm thinking. But I wanted you, that's part of what I wanted to do on this. And if there's any particular part of the style sheet that somebody doesn't understand, also let me know. But for whoever asked, it's just defining these. I copy, I duplicate this file, I name it the new customer, and then I go through and I change my set of colors. I will show you in the next section of this. We'll build something that's a little more streamlined. I wanted it all in one right now. And so, but it's still repeatable because I needed you to see it linearly, right? I needed you to see it top to bottom, that it starts in importing fonts, that it's the root folder. This is where I do everything. I define my colors. I define my gradients. I define what images I'm calling in, right? And then I define how the file is going to look. What color do I want to look? And these things change, right? Some might have a different background and how you want to lay it out, that you just tweak inside here to get the look that you want, right? And but you're only doing it up here at the top. Once you get to the end of this root folder, you pretty much shouldn't have to rarely touch anything below, right? That's not 100%. There are some times where certain files and the certain way you want to present something will work, and you need to build something that's a custom quote. Hopefully I answered that.
Got another one for you while we're doing questions. Any tips to avoid text getting clipped on a touch panel despite it looking fine in Q-SYS Designer? Open it in UCI viewer.
That's usually a pretty good check.
Yeah. UCI viewer is going to give you a more realistic view of what a touch panel is going to look like. I know that's a common point of contention. It looks one way in Designer. It doesn't look that way on my touch panel. Your UCI viewer is going to be a much better look of what it's going to look like on a panel.
And this last one, I've had varying levels of success with this, right? This is a viewport, and Kevin does a really good deep dive on some of these. viewport minimum. So it basically takes, this is 40% of whatever the minimum, right? This is a rectangle, right? So this is the minimum as far as the height width, and gives me, that determines what the text size is. If you use a viewport class or a viewport properties in order to style a button or what have you, that it is also manageable in padding, right? So when you pad it, I can change it here and then change the padding to make sure that it can't cut off, because you've created X amount of padding, and it will actually change the text size based on that. Let's see if I can produce that, right? Let's go do it. Let's not do this. Let's just do it live, right, Coy?
Oh, snap.
Doing it live just because these people are asking. All right, so let's go here. And so I have a 36 font on here right now. I'm going to change this, right? Still, that would make it as big. So if I made the button bigger, right, it just scales with it. But if I also added, I think there's already some padding on here. If I took that padding off, it gets closer. So it will manage the text size based on your padding too. Right, but that's only when you're using a viewport method to size your text, which can be an adventure. I'll just tell you right now, it's an adventure. So you have to play around with it. I found that this 40 VM, because I deal in a lot of mostly rectangle shaped buttons, tends to work pretty well. But as you notice, I don't necessarily always use it, but that's where hopefully that answers that question. But yeah, check it in UCI viewer will usually help. It is frustrating that it looks right in Designer and doesn't look right anywhere else. That depending on what is rendering it. What was the one we were using? Was it Firefox?
Oh yeah, Firefox is unfortunately
Firefox, like if you're looking through Reflect at Firefox, it will do really, never use that as a way to view what's going on from a real thing, because it will do weird things to all of your panel. So, all right. Any other questions there?
let's see. I thought I saw another one. I think a good point would be introducing the setup for light dark mode with a UCI style selector. And just a comment somebody made. Yeah, and I mean that's just a matter of getting your colors figured out so that you can flip between your light and dark mode. But
we'll cover that in part 2.
There you go. Somebody asked, can you define root folder?
I define.
Yeah, we might need some clarification on that one. That came from Clark. What you mean by root folder? Because if you're just talking about variables, that's the root that we're calling out. That's basically just the variables that you can reference in the file. That's not necessarily folders that this is looking in. That's just properties that we're going to use or
that doesn't mean I can define a variable outside of a root folder, but I can't create one outside of. Like I can't have ... whatever outside of a root folder. So a root folder, which is denoted by the colon, is where you house or store your variables and create those variables. Again, I can have variables, and then I can have variables calling variables. I can have variables calling, anything in the file. Just to know that when you create a variable inside of a root folder or period, make sure that if you're calling a variable with a variable inception, if you call it, make sure that it's created, or it will break your style sheet right there. It just says no.
I had another one. Let me go back. Sorry, I'm getting caught up between sending these and reading
No
through.
worries. The,
To the anonymous attendee trying to download the file, if you want to email either Skip or me, if you don't want to put your email in here, we can send you just the style sheet since you're not trying, since you have to open it in Designer 10. Or you can download Designer 10 and then open it. But if you want to email one of us, we can send it to you. Skip.mussett@QSC or coy.veith@QSC. Put those in the chat so you have them as well, but we can send those. Let's see. Jason asked, are those similar to global variables? I'm not sure what those are you're talking about, but the root folder are global variables for within your style sheet, if that's what you mean.
yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, I guess, a Lua comparison, it would be, there's not a lot of rules, but there's rules in this structure that this is how you're declaring that root folder, is how you're declaring where you're going to create variables. Like I am not putting classes inside here. I'm putting variables. Even if the variables are calling on other variables that were created above it, I'm creating all the variables here. And then outside the root folder, right, I am calling, this is how you call that variable. I'm calling a variable. And then I'm recalling that, right? So in here, it would be -- right, nav. And then I get my list of, right, it would be nav color off is what was here before. I think it was here before. But I can redefine that. It also makes it pretty straightforward because that's where VS Code comes in really handy. Is it will give you, if you haven't created it up here, it will not appear on the list and can help you from breaking it, right? That if you haven't created a variable, if I try to call on something that hasn't been created, it will not show up on the list, right? It will not be on this list of variables. Right, that's all the variables that are inside that root folder. Right, if I just wanted the color to be color, I think it is, oops. Right, dark gray, which I think is the same as it was before, that would redefine that as the dark gray color, which refers to, when I say color, refers to the text.
There was a follow-up on the root. He just said, I haven't heard the term root folder in code, so I'm trying to understand what's meant by that. It's just how you call out your variables in your style sheet. You can see there, :root with the open curly bracket is how you would then define any variables you want to use. So that's your root, essentially. Those are your variables there.
With a colon is where you're defining variables. I can't define a variable outside of a root. I can call a variable outside the root. Right? So colon is the root folder. No punctuation to start with is a global property, right? And it has to be something that can have a global property. So in Q-SYS, there's a text box, a group box, a text block, a header, a button, and a page. Those can all be defined as global properties, right? When you put a dot in front of it, that defines a class, meaning it has to be applied to a control or a button or anything, right? That's that choice on this list. Anything with a dot in front of it is what shows up on this list right here in alphanumeric order. Right, so root folder defined by the colons, where you create your variables that you want to call on later. Without any punctuation is a global property. We looked at that with faders and meters and all of those. And those little pop-ups are. And then with a dot, is a class that has to be applied, which is what creates this list right here. Any more questions?
Yeah, let me go up real quick. Jordan asked, can you show real quick just where the stuff gets stored on the PC, the links and stuff? As he's pulling that up, essentially, Jordan, there's a folder that everything gets saved to that designer can reference. And in that folder is where you would save those SVGs or PNGs, anything like that.
So under documents, there's a QSE folder, then there's a designer folder, and then there's a styles folder. Now, inside these folders, the only way that designer knows there's a different file is the name of this folder. Right? Because inside all the file names are style.css, right? And then there's, where I store any images, pics. And for those that want to adventure down, I believe I do have a set of icons. A lot of icons. And by the way, I'm not using any of these in the style. But for those that want to, there's a whole bunch of them. Should you care to go down that route. So yeah, documents, QSE, Q-SYS Designer, styles. That's the folder and we'll put them in.
Another question just popped up. Alphabetical order is used for priority, or is this the order into the CSS file?
So it does not matter how you write them over here. It will sort them alphanumerically. And that is also the order in which it will resolve the property argument. Meaning, which is why understanding your naming, right? Naming, why I have defined. Now, I do it in code anyway, where I define a button as a button. I'm referring to buttons. Two reasons it's a B in CSS. One, it's a higher priority. That's where I'm defining it, but it also means that I can redefine something over the top of it by naming it something different, right? This could be override navigation, right? Meaning it would be lower in an alphabetical when you pull up this list and it would override it. So it does both. It does, again, I did rearrange this so it was mostly alphabetically, just so that it cues me visually about where things are. But if I'm just going to drop a class into something, it doesn't matter where you put it, right? Except for in the root folders, right? So outside the root folder, it doesn't matter where you put a class. Whatever you name it, again, you can't start a class, like you can have it with a dot. You can't start it with a number. And then it will sort them when it shows up on this list here in alphabetical order, which is also the way that it will resolve the argument as far as who has priority over who, right? Like all the font sizes, it wins whoever last one checked. All these icons, last one checked. And like I showed you at the beginning, if you have a class that you define, this has a background defined in all three states: off, pressed, value 1, or on. This only has a background state in the off state. So even though this is technically overriding the nav button, it is only redefining the off state background, because it does not have, right here, it does not have anything with background in the pressed or the on state. So CSS carries down its original defining trait, right? It says this has a background defined in pressed and on. I'm going to keep it. Everything else will get redefined with the icon font. Now, if I change this and I defined color in both of those states, then yes, it would override it all. But everybody understands that. But that also means I don't have, if I define something and it's not going to change in either one of the states, it's a slippery slope. If you're going to define it, I would define it. If you don't want to define it, because sometimes I use that to my advantage where I don't, right? You can play around with, do I define it every single time, all the time, or not? And it really depends. And that's the part where you practice and just seeing how things work and what the objective is that you want to achieve as far as the look. Hopefully that answered that. How we doing?
Good. Somebody was asking for some links to different icons. I'm working on that. That's going in the chat now. We had another question. So those local styles are getting written into the design file, right? So are there any drawbacks to editing the design on a different PC? There's not. You just be aware if you download that file, let's say you go and pull from a core that has a style sheet and you want to edit it, you have to then download that style sheet from the file and then edit it and then save it back into the file. So there's not really any drawbacks necessarily because you can pull that out.
I will give you the one warning.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
One warning. I'm going to go back to this file, right? Remember, it only knows the difference by the name on this folder, right? And it detects that there's a change inside that folder. That's what you're getting that link. If you ever download a file from a designer file and it says make a copy or overwrite, my suggestion to you would be make a copy and then figure out who wins. Yes, it will create a duplicate, but there's not versioning control. It doesn't do that, right? So it's going to, I've just had a situation where I overwrote like 6 months worth of work and it was very extremely painful. And so I always make a copy and then I figure out which is the one I really want. And then I delete the other one. So note to self on that. If you download something that has the same file folder name, right, as what's on your computer, it's going to ask you that. Oh, also inside this file, Coy and I have worked together. Make this big.
And Oscar.
And Oscar. We have to get his view. We wrote 2 different files. They generally work the same. One is the 101 is written in block controller, right? So there's a whole block controller that's associated to this here. And just a note to self, this is the CSS and us writing the CSS for these logo icon inserts right here. And then on the 102, this is all written in UCI script. It's a longhand. So I'll give Coy some credit. I wrote most of this and then he helped me finish it. So that is where some of the longhandedness comes from. So, but just to give you some different views as far as ways to call CSS, if you wanted to call CSS, again, this is in this little section right here. We're actually defining, and if I emulate that, we're defining which icon is up here based on the route. And all the icons that you see on here are from the Oscar.
So the last question here, and then we'll wrap up. Daniel asked, are the icons, I posted some in the chat, are the icons going to be inferior to icons as a font family? So you can take those and make your own icon font like Skip did. He made a lot of his own in Photoshop. There we go. If I can get the words out. But you can take those. Ico Moon's probably one of the better ones to have it make a font for you. If you look through that style sheet, you'll see how those are referenced and how those work. Those, like we said earlier, those are just going to be more easily adapted without having to make a new color icon. These right here that he's showing you, these are going to be, they're going to show up better. They're going to be more editable without having to recreate stuff, without having to change colors, because we can apply a color to a font. So if you make the icon a font, we can change the color. So just know that you can download icons and use them on your buttons, and you're just going to have to test and look at it. Like we kind of said, the way the rendering, one of the questions that came up about images looking pixely and all sorts of stuff, and not designer looking different from a touchscreen, different from an iPad and all that. You're just going to have to test it. Unfortunately, if you load an icon, I've seen it too personally, where those icons don't necessarily look the same on the touchscreen. And so making them a font really gives you a lot more flexibility.
So there's an icon font, I would say fairly large, right? This is a 10-inch panel. And so I don't know what the pixels are, but it's big. Right. I mean, how big can you make a letter on it and the letter still looks good, right? That's the idea behind that. And that's the advantage of using an SVG the way that you should, can use an SVG, is because there's really only one color in these SVGs. I'm not trying to do a multicolored SVG, which you can do. It is limited from a bitrate standpoint, but you can do it. But that's where the scaling information gets kind of sideways, is when you're trying to do that. When you're creating a font, you literally create it. It's black and white. The icon or the font, whether you're drawing letters or whether you're drawing an icon or you're using an image, it is black. And that's how you build a font. And then it defines it as the font shape. It's basically a glyph. Right. This is what you're looking at is, I would call it wingding. It's an AV wingding, right? They're just shapes and random, but it's defined by, it has a Unicode reference in this font. It says this font is referenced by these Unicode characters, right? Which you saw in the sheet, right? These characters right here. That's what happens when you create your own. I would tell you to explore. There's like 150, 160 icons in here. Anyone that wants something different, email me if it's not in here, because I'm always looking for the challenge for whatever it is. I do crazy, weird things. So,
and he has more than what's in there.
I have more that I do. So anyway, I hope everybody got something out of today. Again, next time we'll have some more assets that are going to come out, and we're going to break this. We're going to break it apart and make it faster, and you'll see the speed from the standpoint in creating it that way. We will go over light dark mode and create a light dark mode. And then ultimately I'm going to style based on whatever one you pick. We're going to have a list of 3 companies. You're going to pick which one, and then I'm going to style this UCI based on what you pick right in front of you. So when is that? I think it's in October.
End of October, yeah.
It's in October.
And for those of y'all still on, we do have a deep dive on the 9th, which is designing with NV endpoints. Thomas is hosting that one. And then we have working with our PL loudspeakers in Designer, and Trip's going to host that one. So please join us. That's on the 23rd. So thanks. And please join us again. Like Skip said, we're going to rehash this same file and show you how to repurpose it even deeper. Nick was asking when's the next session. Hang on, let me look at the calendar. I'll tell you.
Not soon enough.
Yeah, not soon enough, unfortunately, just the way the weeks fell. It is.
Although I would suggest as you do it, start using this file will make this next session more powerful. Actually try to use this to actually style a sheet. And then change and like bring in a blank file and actually style it with this style sheet so that you understand how it works.
I think our second part of this session, Nick, is the 28th of October. It's the end of October, so that
Halloween.
right before Halloween, yeah. And we'll have some fun with that one. And to those of y'all who are still asking for the file, I will help you there. Eric asked real quick, can you show one more time where that style sheet is stored on the computer?
All right, so documents, QSE, designer, styles. And that's where all of your CSS will be stored.
Check the help file again. There's a lot of good info on style sheets in the help file. Just, if you're just getting started, obviously this is a little bit more advanced. We didn't cover basic stuff in this, but there's a ton of examples in the help file. Copy and paste that into a fresh one, test it out, see what those things do to just get your bearings about how it all works.
I think I was sharing on that one.
What's that?
So I don't think I
was sharing. No, you were. Oh no, you're sharing. You're not sharing anymore. Hang on, we'll show you that one more time. Eric, who asked for that, and a couple of y'all still coming in with questions. I'll send or with requests for the file. I'm sending those. Bear with me.
Oops. Documents, USC, designer, styles. There's all your folders. This is how designer recognizes the names of things. Again, documents, QSE, Q-SYS designer, styles.
What's my chat? Yeah. Thanks everybody. Gonna shut down here. Reach out to us.
Please.
I'm gonna put my email and Skip's email in here if you want to reach out to us. And anybody still requesting the file, I'll get those sent out here right now. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.